If you've made it to a face-to-face interview, then congratulations. And it's likely to actually take place with either a hiring manager or the actual manager who will be managing you once you join. Often they're sort of accompanied by more senior members of staff, and it is a very good idea to make a great impression. So how do you build rapport with an interviewer when you're in that situation of going into the office, meeting them for the period of the length of the interview, and then having to leave straight after that? Well, before the interview, what I used to like to say in order to help me break the ice and get a conversation going was that I would simply thank them. I would say something like, I really appreciate you making time for the interview. I know that you're probably quite busy, so it must be difficult to find the time, so I really appreciate it. So after the reply, I would look at them and smile and be like, do you like doing interviews, conducting interviews? And oftentimes, whatever the answer is doesn't really matter. I'd let them speak, I'd let them say what they need to say. And then I would ask them, so are you based in this building? So what I'm actually trying to do is encourage them to talk about themselves and showing genuine interest in them without being too weird or too invasive. And oftentimes this actually can lead into a full-on conversation, and often I would say, you know what, this sounds really interesting, I'm gonna ask you more after the interview if that's okay. And then boom, you've managed to come across as somebody who's curious, inquisitive, genuinely interested in the person. And one thing you always got to remember, people love to talk about themselves and what they do. So this generally goes down really, really well, and it also helps you get into the zone and get comfortable with the person, instead of just, you go in, you shake hands and you're shaking, waiting to start the interview, and it just creates a better vibe. Now, after the interview, I always liked to ask them questions again to encourage them to talk about themselves more, and give myself an opportunity to learn more about the company and to come across like I'm really interested. So I would ask things like, and normally after the interview they always ask you, have you got any questions? So always make sure you got some questions, so write these down. I would love to hear about your journey in terms of how you got to your current role here in this company. And that just opens up a whole conversation. And based on what they say, you can then ask follow-on questions. So when they say that I was in this department and then I moved to this department, then you may ask, okay, so is it actually relatively easy to move between departments? Is this something that the company encourages? Another question that I always liked to ask was, I would literally say, I wanted to ask you for some advice in terms of what would you say is the most important quality for somebody to do really well in this role that I'm applying for. And then they go into sort of a whole other conversation. Often they'll say things like, oh, there's not actually one quality, there's a couple, and then they'll tell you about them, blah, 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 blah. And you get into a very nice conversation that way, and you come across as somebody who's thinking about the role, who is keen and inquisitive and wants to learn, and is quite nice to get on with. Everybody loves the opportunity to talk about themselves, as I say. So these are the simple ways in which you can develop a somewhat of a relationship with the interviewer in the very short time that you have with them. So I'd be interested to know, what do you guys have any other questions that you normally like to ask? Let me know in the comments below, and why not? Let's share what works well for you and what doesn't, and maybe others can benefit from it too.